Conservatism. Conservatism tries to conserve traditional values in Western culture. Conservatives typically promote the nuclear family, organized religion, the military, and the protection of private property rights. It holds that what has been inherited from the past is worth preserving and defending. Liberalism. Liberalism is widely regarded as the dominant political ideology of the modern era. It holds that every individual possesses inherent rights, that government must be approved by its own people, and that all citizens deserve equal treatment before the law. It also supports free markets, multi-party elections, a clear separation of governmental powers, and freedom of speech. Conservatism. Conservatism tries to conserve traditional values in Western culture. Conservatives typically promote the nuclear family, organized religion, the military, and the protection of private property rights. It holds that what has been inherited from the past carries genuine social worth and should not be discarded without compelling reason. Liberalism. Liberalism is widely regarded as the dominant political ideology of the modern era. It holds that every individual possesses inherent rights, that government must be approved by its own people, and that all citizens deserve equal treatment before the law. It also supports free markets, multi-party elections, a separation of powers into distinct branches of government, a separation of religion from the state, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. Moderatism. Moderatism prefers to stay within what is called the Overton window, under which is the range of policies considered politically acceptable to the mainstream population. In most cases, moderates are largely apolitical, meaning they hold limited strong convictions and tend to prioritize stability and consensus over any firm ideological commitment. Capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production, operated for profit. Its central characteristics include private property, free exchange, open competition between producers, the division of labor, and broad social cooperation in the marketplace. Democracy. Democracy is a system of government in which political power is derived directly from the people, typically expressed through free and regular elections between competing political parties. It holds that every citizen has the right to vote, to speak freely, and to live without fear of persecution by the state or its representatives. Republicanism. Republicanism is centered around a system of government that is non-hereditary and stands in direct opposition to monarchism. It gives political power to its citizens through a state organized as a republic rather than ruled by a king, queen, or hereditary line of succession. Libertarianism. Libertarianism upholds individual liberty as its core value and seeks to maximize personal autonomy and political freedom. It advocates for a very limited government and shares many of liberalism's foundational commitments, including equality before the law and the basic rights to life, liberty, and property. Egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is a school of thought built on the concept of social equality, prioritizing it for all people without exception. It holds that every citizen of a state must be accorded the same rights and the same treatment under the law, regardless of social background or class. Constitutionalism. Constitutionalism holds that government authority must be derived from and limited by a written or established constitution. It insists that no individual or institution stands above the law and that the fundamental rules governing political power must be clearly defined, codified, and consistently applied across all levels of government. Progressivism. Progressivism holds that social arrangements and traditions inherited from the past are not inherently sacred and should be reconsidered in light of contemporary knowledge and evolving conditions. It prioritizes societal progress over the preservation of existing structures, and in that respect, it is the direct ideological counterpart of conservatism. Social democracy. Social democracy supports a market economy while simultaneously advocating for strong government intervention to promote social justice and reduce inequality. It calls for robust welfare programs, comprehensive labor protections, regulated markets, and publicly funded services, including healthcare and education, all within the framework of a democratic political system. Federalism. Federalism is a system of government in which power is constitutionally divided between a central national authority and smaller regional or state governments. Both levels retain meaningful sovereignty within their own defined spheres rather than one level holding absolute dominion over the other. Nationalism. Nationalism is an ideology centered on the belief that a people sharing a common culture, language, or history constitute a distinct nation and should possess the right to self-governance. It holds that the interests of the nation must be actively promoted and that political identity is deeply tied to cultural and often ethnic belonging. Socialism. There are many distinct types of socialism, making it a broad umbrella term in political theory. In the classical sense, socialism describes a system in which workers own the means of production, with strong support for worker cooperatives, democratic self-management, and workplace democracy. In the modern age, socialism more commonly advocates for workers' democratic participation in economic decision-making, high taxation of the wealthy, and the nationalization of key sectors of industry. One of its most central values is the principle of social ownership over private accumulation. Feminism. Feminism aims to define and establish the political, economic, personal, and social equality of the sexes. It holds the position that most societies have historically prioritized the male point of view, and that women continue to be treated unjustly within these structures. Efforts to change this include challenging entrenched gender stereotypes and expanding educational and professional opportunities for women. Syndicalism. Syndicalism is the most direct and action-oriented descendant of socialist thought. It believes that the unionization of the workforce, the establishment of decentralized revolutionary worker organizations called syndicates, and the advancement of workers' demands through strikes and direct action are the most effective methods by which a socialist society can be built. Once a post-capitalist society is achieved, a congress or commune of syndicates would be assembled to represent the various unions and sectors of the economy in place of a conventional central government. Anarchism. Anarchism is an ideology that advocates for a society without rulers or constituted authority, with individual freedom as its central value. It calls for the abolition of the state and all compulsory hierarchical institutions, replacing them with stateless societies organized through voluntary cooperation and free association between individuals and communities. Corporatism. Corporatism advocates organizing society into distinct functional groups based on areas of employment, such as agriculture, the military, and engineering, to which individuals are assigned according to their skills and interests. It believes in a cross-class system of regulation in which workers, employers, and the state negotiate with one another to run the economy efficiently and, in theory, satisfy all parties involved. It does not refer to a political system dominated by large business interests. That would be a corporatocracy. Environmentalism. Environmentalism, sometimes called green politics, represents a broad range of ideologies that hold nature and the natural world as a significant factor in deciding public policy, from increasing recycling and reducing carbon emissions to halting water pollution and protecting natural ecosystems. Communism. Communism is centered around the common ownership of the means of production. Distribution and exchange, allocating products to every member of society based on need rather than on purchasing power or accumulated individual wealth. A communist society, in its theoretical form, has no private property, no social classes, no money, and no state in the conventional sense. It envisions a fully cooperative order in which the collective product of human labor is distributed equally and according to the genuine needs of each person within the community. Separatism. Separatism, also commonly known as secessionism, seeks to establish a nation, country, sovereign state, or autonomous government that is entirely separate from an already existing nation or political union. It is driven by the conviction that a distinct people, defined by shared ethnicity, culture, language, or religion, possess the right to govern themselves independently rather than remain politically subject to a larger and often distant central authority. Populism. Populism focuses on appealing to large numbers of ordinary people and their shared sensibilities, operating on the belief that what the masses want must be what the masses receive. It takes on many political forms, as its only defining requirement is that it represents a movement by the people and for the people. This gives it no fixed ideological affiliation across the political spectrum. It is most frequently associated with democratic systems because of its dependence on popular support, and it consistently draws a sharp line between ordinary citizens and a self-serving elite, making it inherently anti-establishment and deeply skeptical of existing political institutions and their established representatives. Theocracy. Theocracy is a form of government in which religious authority and political authority are unified under a single ruling power, typically a clergy or a leadership that claims to govern in accordance with divine will or sacred mandate. Law and public policy are derived from religious doctrine rather than from secular reasoning, democratic deliberation, or popular consent of the governed. Monarchism. Monarchism is an ideology that advocates for a system of government headed by a monarch, a single ruler such as a king or queen, whose authority is typically hereditary and passed through a dynastic line. It holds that monarchical rule provides stability, continuity, and a unifying symbol of national identity that elected governments and democratic systems are structurally unable to fully replicate. Imperialism. Imperialism holds that a country should expand its power and influence beyond its own borders, traditionally through military force and the political subordination of foreign nations and their peoples. It was once broadly accepted across much of the world and was at various points regarded as a moderate or even progressive position among powerful states. Over time, however, it has declined sharply in mainstream political legitimacy. Imperialism is characterized by its advocacy of territorial and military expansion, and by the belief that more powerful nations hold the right to govern weaker ones. It has historically defended itself against accusations of oppression by insisting that colonized peoples benefit from the infrastructure, trade, and resources that wealthier and more developed nations are able to provide. Plutocracy. Plutocracy refers to a system in which political power is effectively held by the wealthiest members of society, whether formally constituted or through the disproportionate influence that concentrated wealth exerts on legislative processes, political parties, and public institutions. It does not always describe an explicitly stated ideology, but a structural condition in which wealth determines access to political power and shapes policy outcomes. Kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is a form of government in which those in power exploit the state primarily for personal financial gain, systematically diverting public funds and assets into private hands. Authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is a form of government characterized by a strong and typically centralized power that demands strict obedience to authority while permitting only limited political and civil freedoms to the general population. Most classic monarchies are considered a form of authoritarianism. The ruler of an authoritarian state typically imprisons, suppresses, or persecutes political opponents and critics in order to consolidate and maintain firm control. Fascism. Fascism holds that people are weak and divided as individuals, but become strong and purposeful when united under a shared banner, whether that banner represents a state, a nation, an army, or any comparable collective identity. It is authoritarian in nature, meaning it is characterized by a controlling government that rejects the right of citizens to choose between multiple competing political parties. It concentrates power in a strong central authority, typically a single dictator, and therefore explicitly rejects any separation of governmental powers. Fascism is also ultranationalist, which is the belief that a nation should prioritize its own survival and interests above the rights of all other nations. Ultranationalism within fascism almost always coexists with militarism, which holds that a nation must build and deploy a sufficiently powerful military to advance its national values and interests wherever necessary. Fascism suppresses political opposition through forceful and often violent methods. It believes in a natural social hierarchy and demands that individuals subordinate all personal interests to the perceived good of the nation or the race. Nazism. Nazism is a form of fascism with a particular emphasis on a deeply racist ideology. It holds that the Aryan race is inherently superior to all others, and that the Aryan race should rule the rest of the world in order to improve it. To be classified as Aryan by Nazi standards, a person was required to be white, heterosexual, mentally and physically able, and non-Jewish. Those who did not meet these criteria were categorized as Untermensch, meaning subhuman. Nazism also embraced eugenics, which is a set of beliefs and practices aimed at improving the genetic quality of the human population. For this reason, individuals with inherited conditions were labeled useless and were killed or sent to camps upon identification, as they were regarded as life unworthy of life. Nazism similarly classified homosexuals as Untermensch and subjected them to the same persecution it directed at all groups it considered racially or biologically inferior. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which the state seeks comprehensive and absolute control over every aspect of public and private life, including the economy, education, media, religion, and personal conduct. It differs from ordinary authoritarianism in that it does not merely demand obedience. It demands complete ideological conformity and works systematically to eliminate every independent social institution that could pose a challenge to the ruling power. Ethno-nationalism. Ethno-nationalism is a form of nationalism that places ethnic identity at the center of its political program, holding that the state should represent and serve a single ethnic group above all others. It advocates for cultural, linguistic, and demographic homogeneity and views ethnic minorities or immigrant communities as threats to national cohesion. It typically emerges in response to globalization, mass immigration, or perceived cultural displacement within a society undergoing rapid demographic change. Transhumanism. Transhumanism believes that humanity should embrace and actively pursue the use of technology to overcome both the most fundamental and the most complex of its biological limitations. It holds that science and technological development are the most reliable paths to expanding human capability far beyond its current biological boundaries. The ultimate objective of transhumanism is for all people to eventually achieve a state of indefinitely extended life and a vastly enhanced mind and body, eliminating suffering, disease, and mortality through deliberate technological advancement rather than through natural selection or chance alone. Communitarianism. Communitarianism is an ideology that emphasizes the well-being and central importance of the community as the primary unit of social organization. It typically argues that the conventional left-right binary in political thought is holding meaningful progress back and that policies drawn from both sides of the political spectrum are in many cases complementary rather than opposed. It holds that absolute individualism, when it comes into direct conflict with the common good, becomes destructive rather than liberating. For communitarians, neither the free market nor the state alone can produce a genuinely flourishing society. Only a robust and engaged community can. Cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism is an ideology rooted in the belief that all human beings, regardless of national origin, citizenship, or cultural background, belong to a single global moral community. It holds that obligations to other human beings extend beyond the boundaries of the nation-state, and that political and ethical decisions should account for the well-being of all people, not merely the citizens of any one country. Cosmopolitans advocate for stronger international institutions to address challenges no single nation can solve alone. Pacifism. Pacifism holds that war and all forms of organized political violence are morally unjustifiable under any circumstances, and that conflicts between nations or groups must be resolved exclusively through peaceful negotiation, diplomacy, and dialogue. Its strongest forms reject not only warfare, but all coercive force as a legitimate political instrument, advocating instead for nonviolent resistance as both a moral principle and a practical strategy for achieving change. Humanism. Humanism is a philosophical and ethical stance that places the value, dignity, and rational capacity of human beings at the foundation of moral and political life. It holds that human reason and compassionate inquiry, rather than religious doctrine or supernatural authority, are the most reliable guides to understanding the world and to building just, equitable, and genuinely free societies within it. Technocracy. Technocracy is a system of governance in which decision-making authority is held by technical experts, scientists, and engineers, rather than by elected politicians or representatives chosen through popular vote. It holds that the complex problems of modern civilization, particularly in areas such as economics, energy, and public health, are best resolved through empirical analysis and specialized expertise rather than through political negotiation, partisan compromise, or popular deliberation. Humanitarianism. Humanitarianism is a set of values and practices centered on the moral imperative to alleviate human suffering wherever it exists, regardless of political borders, national affiliation, or cultural identity. It holds that the needs of the most vulnerable, those affected by war, famine, natural disaster, or systemic deprivation, must be addressed as a matter of urgent moral priority. It has given rise to a broad international network of organizations and relief efforts that operate across the globe. Isolationism. Isolationism holds that a nation should stay out of the political, military, and economic affairs of other countries and direct its full resources and energy toward its own domestic concerns. It argues that sustained involvement in foreign conflicts and international alliances drains national wealth, compromises political sovereignty, and generates outcomes that rarely serve the genuine long-term interests of the nation's own people. Protectionism. Protectionism advocates for restricting imports from other countries through tariffs, quotas, and trade barriers in order to shield domestic industries from foreign competition. It holds that a nation's economic self-sufficiency and the preservation of domestic employment must take precedence over the efficiency gains offered by free trade and open global markets. Meritocracy. Meritocracy holds that social and economic rewards should be allocated based on individual talent, effort, and demonstrated achievement, rather than on inherited wealth, social class, or political connections. It holds that a system structured around merit produces the most efficient allocation of roles and resources in a society and offers every individual, in principle, a fair opportunity to rise based on their own capabilities and contributions. Tribalism. Tribalism is the tendency to organize political loyalty and social identity around a defined in-group, whether based on ethnicity, religion, political party, or shared cultural background, and to view those outside that group with suspicion, competition, or active hostility. While it is one of the oldest organizing principles in human social life, it remains a powerful force in contemporary political behavior, shaping everything from electoral coalitions to international conflicts. Secularism. Secularism holds that government and public institutions should operate independently of religious influence and that matters of faith must remain separate from the exercise of political authority. It advocates for a public sphere governed by reason, law, and democratic deliberation, rather than by the doctrines or requirements of any particular religious tradition. It is one of the foundational principles of modern liberal democracy. Liberalism, conservatism, socialism, fascism, anarchism, and every ideology in between are, at their core, competing answers to the same enduring questions about how human beings should organize their lives and share the world with one another. Each of them rests on a distinct set of assumptions about human nature, about the proper scope of state authority, and about what a just and well-ordered society actually requires. They are the frameworks through which real governments make decisions, through which real movements rise and fall, and through which real people choose to see one another as allies or as enemies. Understanding what each one actually and genuinely believes is the first step toward navigating the political world with real clarity. I will be making similar videos, so subscribe to see them.